Hey everybody, it's Taki 117 here, back with Taki's tutorial series. We are sitting on the launch pad, and last episode we talked about getting to the moon. This episode we're going to talk about landing on it. So fortunately for us, the moon is in a perfectly circular equatorial orbit. Now this rocket will definitely get us there. It's a little overpowered, and with proper planning and proper design, you can do a one landing and return with a smaller rocket. But this will work for our purposes. So, here we go. Launching in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there we go. So, like any launch, we are going to turn east. Again, because we're using, we're moving about 170 meters a second east already, just due to planet's rotation. So we want to continue that trend, and we're actually going to use that to boost us kind of into orbit. It's, almost 200 meters a second of delta V that we don't need to burn. Here we go. We are going to pitch over. Ooh, there we go. Much better. Now, the main reason I performed that roll was to get my fins in a proper orientation. If you'll notice, I now have one fin on top and two on the bottom. So now, as I pitch over, my flight path is much more stable. So we are currently ascending to orbit. The moon is... oh, hey, it's right there. Now, step one of any mission going anywhere is get to orbit. Because if you are in orbit, you're halfway to anywhere. But if you look at the delta V requirements, getting to orbit is always going to be at about half, sometimes a little less than half, of the total mission delta V. There we go. There goes that booster stage. Kick in our sustainer, our second stage here. Now I'm going to put this in a 100 kilometer orbit, because, I like to be a little bit above the atmosphere. Obviously the atmosphere stops at 70 kilometers, so you can theoretically have an orbit that has a periapsis of 70 kilometers. I don't recommend it, mostly because, there we go, 100 kilometer orbit, or at least 100 kilometer apoapsis. The reason I don't recommend a 70 kilometer orbit is to account for drift, atmospheric drag, things that affect your orbit while you're coasting to apoapsis. So here we go. We are out of the atmosphere, so we're just going to go ahead and execute this circularization burn. As you can see, it's going to put my apoapsis at 103.09, or it's going to get pretty close. I'm not worried about that part. So like I said, the first step to any maneuvers is to get into a stable orbit. Here we go. As you can see, my orbit is widening because I'm adding horizontal velocity to my rocket. So its orbit is falling and missing the ground. That's all it is. Basically what that means is your sideways speed is much greater than your downward speed, so that as you're falling, you miss. And there we go. Very nice circular-ish orbit. Beautiful. So now we're going to set the moon as our target. And I like, we are off by 0.1 degree. Perfect. So what I like to do, and I'm not going to use my maneuver planner for this, is I like to have the moon on the right hand side at about the 3 o'clock position while looking at Kerbin's North Pole. I'm going to shift my focus to Kerbin so it's right in the middle, and I'm going to place a maneuver at the 6 o'clock position and drag prograde. And as you can see, that will get me an encounter every time. So now obviously, you know, there are a million different ways to do that, but that is guaranteed going to get you an encounter. I of course am going to have MechJeb do this because, you know, it does a much better job than I ever could. So we're going to execute that node. It's going to go ahead and warp us around so that we can do that. Now this is going to put us on a collision course. We don't necessarily want a collision course, but for now it's fine. We will actually adjust our trajectory later. Oh, here we go. Warping around again. Now, that's the other reason I like to get into a stable orbit before going to the Mun especially, is because it allows me to pick when I go. You know, I don't have to worry about timing, you know, timing my launch, timing my transfer, anything like that. I can just, you know, get into an orbit and be like, okay, the Mun is here, I need to burn here, good to go. And oh good, I will have about 500 meters a second of delta V in my transfer stage once this burn is finished, which is more than enough once we get where we're going. And here we go. Encounter. And a beautiful, beautiful encounter. So we are now going to warp to our maneuver. Focus on our vessel here, and we can actually watch Kerbin get smaller and the moon get larger as we transfer to it. So here we go. Getting ready to cross the sphere of influence. Now, you don't want to cross the sphere of influence under too much warp. Anything more than about 10 is probably too much. I personally like to go down to 5 or even not at all. The main reason for that is because your orbit could shift due to calculations that, you know, Kerbal Space Program has to perform, so that, you know, it could shift quite a bit and you'll be far off target. Okay, here we go. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to point radial out. Now the reason I'm pointing radial out is so that I can adjust my orbit. Now I am just inside the sphere of influence of the Mun. So what this is going to do, and I'm going to go ahead and set my focus here, is it's going to shift my orbit so that it's no longer on a collision trajectory. It's going to take, that looks like about 15-ish, maybe 20 meters a second of delta V. Okay, looks like a little more than that. Not important. Now, when orbiting the Mun, I like to be in about a 20 kilometer orbit. Again, personal preference. You can go as low as, I think the highest point is 10 kilometers. But, again, personal preference. But you want to be fairly close to the surface before you begin your deorbit burn. Now, already I'm looking at my projected orbit, and I'm trying to find a good landing spot. You can see the moon rotating below me, which I will need to take into account. There's a good one there. I like that one. So the moon rotates at about 6 meters a second. It's not a lot, but it's enough that it will screw up where you're trying to land if you don't plan for it. So here we are, performing a retrograde burn to, get into an orbit of the moon. And it looks like, as soon as this is done here, yep, there we go. That is a good spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a maneuver node here. I'm going to drag retrograde. Whoop. Wrong handle. I'm going to drag retrograde. And I'm now going to shift it to about there. So the moon is rotating, staring at the screen, in a counterclockwise motion, which means this point where I'm trying to land is slowly going to shift this way. So I planned my maneuver to come up short to account for that. Now, it's not an exact science by any means. I am, however, going to perform this landing completely manually. So everything you see that is going to happen, I'm piloting this craft. That's important to remember. Because, MacJeb does have, a landing autopilot, for lack of a better word. But, I'm going to be doing this completely manually. So we're going to warp around here. This is going to be a 1 second burn, which is fine. Burn time is not important. Delta V is not important at this point, especially because I have quite a bit left in my transfer stage. I'm going to use that for my initial deorbit. And you can already see the moon has rotated over. Ooh, alright. So here we go. And stop. Perfect. See, here I used the maneuver more as a guidance rather than a hard and fast maneuver. So now I'm going to switch back to our craft, and I'm just going to go ahead and jettison my transfer stage. It still has 166 meters a second, which I could use, but I don't need to. I don't want to. There we go. And it will eventually crash into the surface. So I'm extending my landing gear a little early. Again, personal preference. But here we go. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to bring up my surface information, which tells me my sea level altitude and my true altitude. So, as you can see, my true altitude is higher than my sea level altitude because this particular area on the Mun, where I'm orbiting, is actually below sea level. So here we go. Now, I'm not doing anything at the moment. I have selected the retrograde. I want surface retrograde specifically for this. I'm going to come down, hopefully. Let's see where I am. Okay. So this might not go very well at all. Alright, 5 kilometers up. I'm going to go full blast. Now, I limited the thrust back in the vehicle assembly building to give me a thrust to weight ratio of roughly 1 on the moon. However, when I actually got here, I found out that that's a little conservative, especially since I am flying this manually. I am going to land in a nice spot though. So now what I'm doing is I'm killing my horizontal velocity, burning retrograde. 1, there we go. So you can see my horizontal speed decreasing. I want that to be as low as possible. Now, of course, this is going to be a lot more accurate than someone without MechJeb would be able to get, but that's fine. 5, 4, 3, 2, and that is about all I can get. So here we go. We're falling quite peacefully, actually. I'm about 600 meters from the surface. It doesn't look like I'm going to have enough fuel to get back. Now, I want my landing to be less than 10 meters a second, preferably less than 5. As you can see, I have a very low throttle setting. So we come down 30 meters, 20 meters, 2.5 meters a second, 10 meters, and there we go. We have successfully landed on the moon. Not hard. Well, it's hard if you don't know what you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and EVA Jeb here. I'm going to plant a flag to commemorate this occasion. Mostly because I want to see the new flag planting animation. Okay. Same as always. They did fix the clipping issue. I will call this on site Alpha. Here, Jeb Kerman first set foot on the moon. So, I'm going to activate our rocket pack with the R key. So glad they added this EVA nav ball. Shift brings us up. W moves us forward. We're just going to grab onto that. And we're going to board it. So, now to come home. Getting here is the easy part. Coming home, not so much. So, what we're going to do is we are going to, at least I'm going to limit my thrust to 15%. That's still a little high, but it's fine. And we are going to lift off and turn immediately to the east at about 45 degrees. I need my orbit info up. Now normally, of course, I would do this all from map mode and pull my landing gear in. I don't need them anymore. And we're performing a gravity turn just like we would from Kerbin, but because, you know, the Mun specifically is an airless body, we can do it right off the pad and do it much more aggressively. And for this, I'm actually only going to go into a 10-kilometer orbit. I am going to up this just a little bit. To 25, just personal preference more than anything. See our landing site back there. 8 kilometers. 9 kilometers. 10 kilometers. Okay. Once again, gonna let, you know, MacJeb do all the work. And it looks like I'm gonna have to get out and push when I get back. So execute this maneuver. This is the same maneuver that we would use at Kerbin to get us into, you know, Kerbin orbit there. And 10. Beautiful. Perfect. So once again, I'm going to do at least this part manually, and then let's see, I have 210 meters a second. Let's see if I can get back for that. So I'm going to put a maneuver right in front of the moon's, or the Mun's direction of travel, which at this point is down. And there we go. 204, not bad, but takes my periapsis way far away, and there's not really a good way to do that. Let's see if I can adjust. 3,000, let's see. Nope. Oop. So I could fiddle with it. It'd probably take me quite a long time to get it down to less than 210. Or I can return from the moon with a 36 kilometer. Okay. So it gets me there. I am going to have to get out and push. So let's this is most unfortunate. $47. 35 kilometers. That will work. Unfortunately, it's a little much for what I have left, but that's okay. Chalk it up to poor piloting, specifically landing. Whoops. I'm just going to come around here. Actually, I'm going to execute that node. Now, I'm going to do something I don't like doing. I'm going to open up the cheat menu, and I'm going to enable infinite fuel. So to open the cheat menu on a Windows machine, it's Control, Alt, and F12. Bring this up, and we want cheats. Or no, we want resource. This is a new cheat menu. Cheats. Ah, here we go. So yes, we click on the cheats menu and we select infinite propellant. Now, the reason I don't like doing this is because, well, you get does what it says on the tin. You get infinite propellant. So I'm gonna wait until my propellant runs out. See my resulting orbit. It's actually pretty close. It is still going to take quite a bit to push, but you know, we get around to it. There we go. So that's the cheat menu. Useful specifically when doing things like this. I don't like using it, as I said. Let's shift focus back to our spacecraft, and we're going to warp our way back to Kerbin. So, our periapsis is at 35, a little more than 35.5 kilometers. I'm going to warp until my altitude is 70 kilometers. Now, why 70? Well, as I said before, that's where the atmosphere starts. Alright, we're at 70 kilometers. I want to point radial out, or actually I want to point radial in prior to jettisoning the bottom half of my spacecraft. Jettison that, and then we point retrograde. The main reason I point radial is so that goes away and it doesn't shift my orbit any. Now, as you can see, the atmosphere is slowing me down, so my apoapsis is dropping. This is the same as if I had performed a retro burn, you know, at periapsis. My periapsis is also dropping a little bit, and that's simply because I'm not performing the maneuver at periapsis. But this is exactly what I want. I want my periapsis to fall and my apoapsis to come down to within the atmosphere. So this is going to be quite the process. I've also set up I'm going to set up my parachute to deploy at 0.5 atmospheric pressure so that it doesn't deploy early. There we go, we are falling. Periapsis is now 31.5 kilometers and falling. My apoapsis is coming down quite nicely, already at 400 kilometers and dropping. You can see it shifting now, and we are going to return in a single orbit. There we go. Now, in Kerbal Space Program, returning in a single orbit is not a big deal. You don't have to return in a single orbit simply because Kerbals will live without food and oxygen, life support, indefinitely. So you can make as many passes as you need until you feel comfortable. Now, the reason the Apollo programs did it is because they only had a limited amount of food and oxygen and life support in their capsules. So, the sooner they returned, the better. Still falling through the atmosphere. As you can see, we are getting... no. Looks like we're good. We are slowing down. Now, this pod is aerodynamically stable. As you've noticed, I have my stability assistance system turned off, and I've stayed retrograde the entire time. This is what you want. You want an aerodynamically stable pod. So if you attach things on here, make sure you attach them either in pairs, or you have one thing on one side and one thing of an equal weight on the other side, so that it balances itself out. You do not want to unbalance the capsule, otherwise you run the risk of it flipping. So now that we're through the worst of it, you also don't want to deploy your parachutes when you are supersonic. Supersonic is basically anything above 300 meters a second of indicated surface speed. The main reason for that is because your parachute will rip off of your capsule and you will fall a lot. This is why I like setting my parachute to 1/2 atmosphere. There we go. So that it will deploy when I am well below that supersonic threshold. And at 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer in altitude, it will open fully, slowing me to a sedate 5, almost 6 meters a second. I will slowly fall the rest of the way. And we're falling. And there we go. We have safely been to and returned from the Mun. So, I'm Taki117. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's only rocket science.